everybody. This is Tips, Tools, and Techniques. It's a club that we sponsor here at the Sewing Studio. I've been doing tips, tools, and techniques for 12 and a half years, and since last March I've been doing it live and enjoying it very much because I get to talk to people all over the world. Here I see somebody from West Virginia. Good morning, Bonnie. Good morning, Joyce. Everybody, Barbara, thank you for joining us. I have a ton of content today. You may know that I wasn't here last month because I was vacationing. After 2 months of unpacking boxes, I decided it's time to get away and do something else. We went up to the mountains for a few weeks. But I'm back and I have lots of brand new content and some good stuff from a few years ago that you might enjoy. And so let's get to it. First, as always, I'd like to tell you about the classes that I'm teaching here this next quarter. There aren't as many as there usually are because it's Christmas time and we just have less classes. But I do have a lot of basic sewing and basic quilting classes. I've got, oh shoot, Gabriella, could you grab the pillowcase? It's in the queue apparently. It's a Christmas pillowcase and I forgot to grab it. Anyway, so I've got an apron, thank you. So this is a pillowcase. If you're familiar with the burrito pillowcase or the, I don't know, it's got different names to it. It's the one that we make millions of them at Ryan's Cases for Smiles here at the store to give to children. And this is a technique that I'm going to show you. It's very basic sewing. This is one piece of fabric, even though it looks like it's patchwork. It's one piece of fabric, and then a little trim, and then a little cuff. So you need a total of 1 yard of fabric. And I've got the numbers on the supply list. And we talk about. You can do a close-up one more time here, Gabriella. We talk about a French seam. Oh, there's my little tag. But the French seam, there's only one French seam, so you can either do that or do serger. But you can see where it looks just as good on the front, on the inside, as it does on the outside. So you'll learn how to do that technique. Thank you. So this is the pillowcase, and it is actually a Saturday class. So if you work during the week, or if you're not able to get to class during the week, this is a good basic sewing class. Of course, you don't have to do it in Christmas fabric. You can do it in anything. But I just think it would make a great gift for children, for really anybody. I have an embroidery machine, and my kids had tons of pillowcases with their names on them, because who doesn't love something with their name on it? And then they could take it to sleepovers or whatever. So that is a fun thing. I think there's a few openings, and it's Saturday, December 11th. Still time to make some for Christmas gifts. Gabriella and I, well, actually, no, in a few minutes, we're going to show some aprons, but I've got an apron class, and it's actually full. So just this morning, we opened up another class on December 8th for this apron, which I'll be showing in a few minutes. So December 8th, and it's a 4-hour class. Most of my classes are 3 hours, but I want to get you in and out in one morning, get the whole thing done. So that's December 8th. My Quilting Basics class continues to be super popular. We just make a very simple placemat. The more important thing is you're learning how to choose fabric, you're learning how to cut with a rotary cutter, how to press properly, how to sew a scant 1/4 inch, how to baste a quilt, quilt a quilt, bind a quilt. And we do that in 2 3-hour sessions. So I've got basic quilting coming up 2 more times this year. Let me just tell you, one in October and one in November. So you can look for that. By the way, everything is on sewing.net. We have a class tab across the top. I think it's in the purple line, or just below the purple line. It says classes, and then a lot of people don't know there's a little filter. So it looks like a little funnel, down a little bit on the left. There's a funnel, and if you click on the funnel, you can sort by different things or filter by different things. So if you filter by my name, of course, you can see all the classes that I teach, or you can filter by somebody else's name. So that's one way to get to the classes, because if you just pull them up, they're not really sorted by anything. So it's good to be able to zero down on what you need. AccuQuilt continued to be a popular set of classes. This is an AccuQuilt raggedy quilt. Let's get a close-up here. We love raggedy quilts because they fray in the wash, and they're lots of fun. And the nice thing about this die is it does all this cutting for you. Oftentimes when we make a raggedy quilt, you sew all these sandwiches together. Each square is its own sandwich of front, batting, and backing. You sew them all together, and then you have to trim, clip, 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 and it could take days and it makes your hands hurt. But the AccuQuilt die, it's a die cutting system, will actually do the cutting for you. So you cut them out, sew them together, finish it up, and you're done. So that's what the back looks like. So that is coming up, and it does have some openings on October 19th. That's a Tuesday. A couple more classes. Oh, this is actually kind of a non-sewing quilt. It is all fused on, and the pattern makes it very simple. I'm about to start on my second one because I love this so much. If you're familiar with Laura Heine, it's very similar to her technique, but it's not her. It's Emily. I'm going to forget the name of it. I think it's Emily Taylor is her name. The patterns and the kits are available on the website, and I forgot to say, so let me say it now. Just about everything I talk about today is on my favorites page. So if you're on Facebook and you scroll up, or Gabriella will put it in the comments. But if you scroll up, you'll see a link to my favorites page, and everything you get today, there'll be a discount, and I'll tell you in a second what that discount code is. And the discount is good until tomorrow night. And then also, when you scroll up, you'll see print the handout. So while I'm going on and on this morning, go ahead and print your handout if you have a printer. If not, just bring it up on another window and you can follow along. And I'll tell you that I'm probably not going to follow the order exactly today on the handout, but you've got it all there. I think it's 4 pages. So Gabriella has put a link in the comments for my favorites. So again, as I talk about it, I'll say it's on my favorites page and you'll know right where to go. So I talked about June Bloom. This is a class. You don't have to take the class to buy the kit and the pattern. And she's got some good videos there along the way. Gabriella, we've put up the discount code. So if you type in TTT as you're checking out, you'll get that 15% off our regular price. 2 more classes I want to talk about. I've got machine quilting coming up November 6th, which is a Saturday, and I just checked a minute ago, and I can't believe there's still some openings on my machine quilting for Saturday class, because that usually fills right away. So if you're a working person and would like to take machine quilting class, and what do I teach? I teach, let's see, I'll go back to my handout here, how to mark a quilt. Most of the time I don't mark a quilt, but we'll talk about how to mark a quilt. We'll talk about how to baste a quilt. We talk about threads and batting, how to choose a backing, how to choose a pattern, how to troubleshoot if you're breaking threads, if you're shredding threads, if your tension is wrong. We talk about troubleshooting. We talk about resources. So it's a very comprehensive class. I promise you, when you're done, your brain will be full. And oftentimes people come back a second time just because they're in a different place in their quilting journey. And even though I say the exact same things, you'll pick up something new. I've been teaching this class for 20 years. And by the way, this month is my 20th anniversary with the Sewing Studio. So I've been teaching this class for 20 years, once or twice a quarter. So and every time I teach it, it changes a little bit because I learn more, and I learn more from others, and the handout changes, so it just keeps improving. So Marie asks, she inherited a Janome with many accessories and doesn't know all of its possibilities. Can she sign up for one-on-one instruction and bring her in her machine? Absolutely, and she lives in Gainesville. It's a 2-hour drive. I know that because I do that drive all the time. Yeah, you can. Tell us what kind of machine you have, and we'll be glad to help you with that. If you did not buy the machine here, there is a charge, but I don't know very much about that. Do you, Gabriella?
It's an hourly.
And there's an hourly fee. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Give us a call, and we'll be glad to help you out. And we're glad to be Janome dealers. If you haven't heard yet, we are now selling Janomes. So I'm excited about that because I own several Janomes, and now I can get my machines fixed here. I mean, not that he couldn't before, but it's easier. And yeah, so that is an announcement. Oh, and then speaking of announcements, we've got, I'll put this here so you can look at it, and you may not be able to read it completely, but this is another shop hop coming up in November 19th through December 4th. And a shop hop means that if you hit all 9 stores in this area and you get your passport stamped, passport's $5 now, it'll be $6 during that week. It's probably, looks like it's probably more than 10 days. Anyway, if you get everything stamped, then they pull names, and the first prize will be a $75 gift card to your favorite store, and then the second prize will be a $50 gift card to your favorite store. And so people like to, travel with their friends and hit all the stores within that time. Somebody do the math for me, but it looks like that's more than 2 weeks. Oh, and then you receive, at each store you receive a fat quarter. So that's what you're getting, is you're getting a fat quarter per store. So it's called the Fa La La Fat Quarter Shop Hop. So enjoy that. All right, so any questions, please? I love questions. It makes me know that you're actually watching me and thinking about it. So then you have good questions. All right, so we're going to start by talking about aprons. And I am teaching an apron class, and I've talked about this apron several times in TT&T, and all of a sudden I'm having trouble with this. It's really not that difficult, Mary Janine. This class, I have one of these at home, and I swear I wear it all the time, but I guess I'm just a wee bit nervous here, and so all of a sudden it looks like I can't do it. So I'm just going to turn it over, and we're going to use the red side. It's a reversible, as you can see, but you put it on, put your arms through, and this is one of the 2 aprons that I'll be teaching today, and Gabrielle is going to come over here and show the other one, not today, for the apron class. So this is called the crisscross pattern, and Gabrielle is going to lift this up here. We're going to show it. This is called the what do we call this? Excuse me, 6 corners, 6-corner apron. It's got the 2 corners on the bottom, and then a cute corner over here with all the buttons, and then 2 corners up at the top, and then one corner, of course, in the back. So it's basically 2 triangles that you sew together, and they're actually attached by the neck. And it is not reversible, but you use 2 different fabrics. So we've got a slightly different fabric there, but beautiful in Christmas fabrics, but really beautiful in any fabrics. And I've got Christmas Mickey here in mine. So thank you, Gabriella. Yeah, so again, one more time in case you're confused. I'm teaching an apron class. The first one filled right away. It's basic sewing. So I'll be teaching it again on December 8th from 9:30 to 1:30. So it's a 4-hour class. I wanted to talk a little bit about this apron. I have made this about 5 times now. Super easy. I'll step up on the stepped stool just a minute so you can see it. But it is reversible. You can use either side of it. So if one side gets dirty just before the guests come, you can switch it around. And so I wear this one a lot. I have them in several different colors. But I had a quick little demo here for you, and we're actually in a minute, Gabriella, we're going to do an overhead shot, but not quite yet. So this is the pattern. All I have to do is get it out. This is the pattern. Mary Mulari. I am a huge fan of Mary Mulari. I used to watch her on Nancy Zeman's show long time ago. I'm sure I'm showing my age, but she just had really fresh, interesting ideas. And a few years ago, she came to Daytona, the shop in Daytona, and did an all-day presentation, and I was in heaven just to be in her presence. So this is one of her many, many, many patterns, and really, really well thought out. So what I've got here is a yard of fabric, and in fact, this pattern calls for 2 yards of fabric, so one for the inside, one for the outside. But look how brilliant this is. So when you open up this pattern, it's one big hunkin' sheet of paper. And if you knew you were only going to make this once, you could just go ahead and cut the pattern out of the paper. But personally, when I'm cutting clothing, these paper patterns sometimes are a little too stiff for me to work with. So instead, I took some product we have called True Sew, and it's on my favorites page, and I put it on top, and I traced out the pattern on my True Sew, and I'm missing a piece here. Dadgummit, did it fall on the ground? I'll find it in a minute. There it is. Okay. So one of the brilliant things about this pattern is that the pocket pattern fits in here, so there's no wasted fabric. So watch what happens here. So I traced everything out, then I cut out my trousseau, and then away goes the pattern. And then here's my yard of fabric. And by the way, the fold is by my belly button. So I'm going to lay out the fold. Do you see? I had to write on my my trousseau. I had to write fold, so I know which one to put the. There we go. Very good. So here it is. So now I can lay this out, and I'm just going to tell you, I brought my 45mm rotary cutter, and it probably worked just fine, but I'm going to recommend that if you own or have been wanting to own a 28mm rotary cutter, then this is going to be work better around these little curves. Judy Bird asks if I've ever done garden flags, just as an aside, and no, I have not, because I'm not a big fan of working with nylon. You'd probably have to do some kind of nylon out there. I have to tell you, I just bought one recently for my camper, and I just go to Etsy, and they can personalize them on Etsy. So, you know, I'll do what I enjoy and let somebody else do the rest. Okay, so anyway, as you can see, it's three pieces to this pattern, very easy to cut out. And in fact, I'm Mrs. Efficient, so I will put this fabric on top of the other piece folded at the same time and cut through all 4 layers at the same time. So of course, when you cut something on the fold, it opens it up, and that's the full pattern. This is you're just looking at half the pattern because we're on the fold. One more thing, if you don't take the class, you won't know this, but when I make these pockets, she recommends just lining it with a little bit of interfacing. Gabriella, we're going to come back up here. But I like to actually line with another piece of fabric. So I'm actually going to take this pattern and I'm going to cut it out 4 more times out of another piece of fabric. So both of my pockets have a lining that have nothing to do with this. I could, of course, bought a fat quarter of these 2 other fabrics and made them match, but you know what? Nobody's going to see the inside of these pockets except me. So I just found some Christmas fabric in my stash and used that for the lining. You don't have to do your pockets like that, but I like a pocket that has a little substance to it. And if you she didn't even use interfacing, she just kind of stabilized the top edges. So it's a single layer of fabric. And again, I like my pockets to be double layers, so that's why I did that. But you don't have to, of course. So any questions about how to lay this pattern out? So Pat Loftus wishes I could do a class at Lady Lake. I do too, Pat. I wish it wasn't so far away. It is a long drive. By the time I get there and come home and deal with all the paperwork, it's like an 8-hour thing for me, and I just don't have that kind of time anymore the way I used to. So you'll have to come down here and visit me. I think that's everything I wanted to say about the aprons. So we're going to continue on. As you can see, it's pretty easy to get out of. There's the other side, by the way. It's the exact same fabrics, just reversed. So you gotta love Mickey. And I have to tell you, I've been keeping a gratitude journal lately, and I had to be very grateful because when I cut this out, I didn't realize until after I cut it out that the Mickeys had to be in the right. They almost 50-50-50. They could have been upside down, but they were right side up. So I was very grateful for that day. All right. We are going to continue on. I have a new quilt to show you and an old one that I made. I've loved this pattern so much. I made it years ago. Got to get the top of it. I made it years ago. I realized the pattern was still available, so I decided to make it again. This is called Shenandoah, and I'm going to show you the pattern, which is of course available on my favorites page. So this is Shenandoah. Thank you. And this of course is it's not the baby wall hanging, it's the crib size. It's still kind of small, but that's okay. So there it is, and notice that I used a very large print, but that print, I kept it going throughout the page. So you notice, for example, this what is it, a planet here? He continues on there. Some of it's cut off, and then in the middle of it, there's a big old moon or Saturn, and I don't know what that is, but it continues across. So my point here is that if you have a large print in your stash, this is a great time to use it. If you don't have one, we've got them. This print is actually on my favorites page. We have a really nice space collection that does. I don't think it gets enough interest. So I thought I'd make a space quilt. I used a little bit of orange as an accent piece. I'm going to talk in a minute about this flange binding, but I am totally in love with this flange binding. You see it's kind of three-dimensional, and I'm going to do a little demo. In fact, your first handout, if you've just joined us, there's a 4-page handout, and the first page is we're going to talk about flange binding. So I'll talk about that in just a moment. Just a few more things about this quilt. Because it's space and things go round and round, I quilted it in a spiral design with gray thread, but it looks white because the fabric's so dark. This gray, we have a lot of gray fabric, but this one seemed to work pretty well for this particular hunk of fabric. And then I have to show you the back for a moment, so we're going to back out, zoom out there, Gabriella. So if you've heard me talk at all, you've heard me talk about how when you're making the back of a quilt, and this quilt, I think this quilt worked out to be 40 inches wide, which in a perfect world, one piece of fabric should be wide enough. But you also know, if you've been quilting for a while, that you can't just make a back the exact same size as your front, because it is very difficult to get those 3 layers together without, okay, this corner's wrong, okay, that corner's wrong. You could spend an hour trying to get that top on there perfectly. So I like to make my back, well, we all should be making our backing fabric at least 3 to 4 inches bigger on all the way around. Well, to solve that problem, instead of adding a little bit to both sides, I put something in the middle and looked like I meant to do it. And in fact, this space fabric is left over from the front, and rather than just putting it in there, looking kind of weird, I highlighted it with a few little tiny strips of gray, just to show that I meant to do that. Thank you. So that's how I deal with a backing fabric. If I just don't want to buy a whole nother length of fabric, and I've got some scraps left over from the front, I go ahead and use it on the back of the quilt. Yeah, so this is the second size up, but the pattern has 6 sizes: baby, crib, throw, twin, full, queen, and king. So that was that one, and then I want to show you, some of you, if you've been with me for a while, may remember this one. It hung in the classroom for a few years. But this is also Shenandoah. It's the exact same pattern, again with a really large print. I don't know where the print came from. Please don't ask me what the SKU number on this fabric is, because it's long gone. But I bet you probably have something in your stash, or we've got some awesome fabrics. In fact, one of the things I meant to do this morning, and I forgot, was to go out and find some bolts of large prints that would work nicely with this fabric. But don't you just love this lime green? I think I had a label. Oh, and then I'll talk about this soon, but this is another way to deal with a large backing, and I use a diagonal seam, which we've talked about before. But if you were to Google John Flynn and diagonal seam, you would find, and actually on my website, Florida Quilt Network, which is at the bottom of your handouts, I have a calculator. If you tell it how big your quilt is and how wide your backing is, it'll calculate how to do these corners. So There used to be a calculator out there in internet world, and they took it off, so I had my husband rebuild it on my website. Anyway, wasn't really going to talk about diagonal backing. Okay, so one of the things I wanted to talk about with this, and I'm going to wait for a moment because I have another quilt to show you with long strips, is many of you have heard my technique about sewing 2 long strips together, and we're going to do a demo because I haven't done that demo on screen since last November, and I want to be sure that you get it because I've been told many times it's the best tip that I've got out there, so, and I'm okay with that. Let's see, Carol wanted to know the name of the fabric used instead of paper, and that is Trousseau. Thank you. So it's Trousseau, and it's on my favorites page, and it's, or sorry, True Grid. I think I've been saying Trousseau all this time, but there isn't. Don't we have a product called Trousseau? No, True Grid. Whoops, sorry, my bad. I'm thinking of something else. All right, was that the only question that I missed? Okay, cool. So I'm going to talk in a minute about how to sew long strips together. Anytime you have strips that are longer than 12 inches, I would use that technique. And then let's talk now about this flange binding. Again, it's 3-dimensional. I wouldn't necessarily use flange binding if I had a quilt that had little 1/4-inch pieces going to the very edge, because this binding works out to be just a little bigger than 1/4 of an inch. But if I've just got fabric here, just printed fabric, then the flange binding just makes everything pop. And I'm just, I put off learning about flange binding for years, thinking, oh, that's just too much. I'll learn it one day. And then one day it came up on Missouri Star, or somebody mentioned it, and I went over there, and she made it so easy that I learned how to do it. I wrote a handout, and I'm talking about it as much as I can because you guys, you have to try it. It is super easy. So I've got a little demo here for the and a handout. So pull out your handout one more time. If you haven't heard me just talk about handouts, if you scroll to the top of the Facebook in the description, it talks about my handout and my favorites page. There's links for both. So go ahead and print it out, or at least bring it up on another screen or your phone or your tablet or whatever, so you can follow along. All right, so here's what's going to happen. And I talk about how I do use Missouri Star. She's got a great video, which of course you can watch, and I've got the URL there for you. The one difference between Jenny and I is Jenny likes 2.5-inch binding. Many people do. I was taught how to bind. Quick story, when I joined the Central Florida Quilters Guild, which is no longer, up in Sanford, the very first meeting, it was a judge who had just judged the last show, and she said to somebody, you guys need to learn how to do your binding because you guys don't know how to do binding. So she came for free the very next week, which is when I came, to show us how to do binding to put your quilts in a show. And I've been doing my binding the same way ever since, and even though less than 1% of my quilts end up in a show, I feel like I'm doing it the right way, and that's how I teach people how to do binding. Binding should finish, I knew I'd drop binding should finish at 1/4 of an inch, because again, if your pieces go all the way to the edge, which they probably do on the quilt behind me, then you don't want to cover up more than 1/4 of an inch of fabric. I'm not saying you should never do a wide binding, but just be thinking about it. Also, your batting should completely fill your binding. So if you have air in your binding, it's gonna wear faster than if you're not. Do I teach flange binding in any class? I do not. So keep an eye out, Pat. All right, so let's talk about flange binding. What the heck is it? The good news is you don't have to cut your fabrics 2 1/4 inch wide. On my handout, I started to say Jenny does it 2.5, but I do it 2 1/4. So I reworked the numbers for you on the handout. So the flange fabric is going to be 1.5 inches wide, and the binding fabric on the outside is going to be 1 1/4 inches wide. So this is actually literally left over from the space quilt I was just showing you. So you can see my fabric. I'll just pull it up here for a second. Don't move anything. So you can see my flange it's kind of weird to think about it, but the flange fabric is actually a little bit wider, 1/4 of an inch wider than the outside fabric, but it works out. It's magic, I tell you. So you're going to measure your quilt. Let's say it's 200 inches. In fact, that quilt, I think it was. So I'm going to cut 200 inches of gray, 200 inches of yellow, gold, sew them end to end, and then attach them in one really long piece. This is what's left over from the piece that I did. Okay, you with me so far? Again, sew them all end to end and then attach them. All right, so here we go. Here's my little demo. Where's my front? Okay, so this is the back of the quilt and this is the front of the quilt. We're going to attach the binding to the back of the quilt and bring it around to the front. Watch this magic that happens. So the yellow is the flange. When this comes around, that's all that's left is that little yellow. And I also want to say something real quick. If you've not taken my binding class, you may not have heard me say this, but I have learned to never fold my binding in half before I attach it. I can fold it in half, but I'm not going to press it in half. And that is true here as well. I have learned that if I just sew it on a curve, it works even better. The reason it works even better, if you think about it, your binding fabric, a little bit less fabric is going to be used on the inside than on the outside. And if you fold this in half and force the issue, when you bring it around, it's not going to be happy because less fabric, it's called turn of the cloth, and less fabric was used on the inside. Don't anybody move. I have to get a drink of water here. All right, I'm back. Okay, so we're not going to press that in half, but we're going to fold it in half gently. Okay, so here I am. I'm on the back of the quilt. I'll leave a little tail. I'm going to sew just like I always do, miter my corner just like I always do, go all the way around just like I always do, finish off the two ends just like I always do. If you don't know what I'm talking about, take my binding class. And then when we bring it forward and we want to sew this down, I have a thread here, get rid of that. When I bring this forward and want to sew it down, I'm going to get my, I'm actually going to use my yellow thread to sew this down. And, excuse me, okay. So I'm going to use my yellow thread to sew that down. Just the way I do with my binding, I bring up the bottom, pull it over, and sew it down. It takes a little practice to get it right, but what I wanted to talk about was this very fine thread called Invisifil. And I'm going to pull we're going to do a close-up one more time of this, Gabriella. And I used Invisifil to sew down this yellow, it's actually probably the worst spot, so I'm going to turn this over and make it look better because, yeah. Anyway, this is size 100, guys. It's like as fine as a hair. And we sell it in all different colors. It's on my favorite page. But seriously, I have like 3 or 4 colors to my name. I have a white, I have a black, and then I have a couple what I call shadow colors. So as I'm sewing this down, tightly down in the yellow ditch, this is not going to show. I mean, if you were to get in super tight, you would not be able to see. You'd have to get in there, pull it apart, and really put your glasses on and look for it. So this is one of the great reasons I love Invisifil. It's not completely invisible, but it is pretty close, Invisifil. The other time I really like Invisifil is for when I'm stitching in the ditch. So sometimes if I have a very large quilt and I want to stitch in the ditch vertically and horizontally, I will take my gloved hands and I'll pull the fabrics apart and I'll get in there nice and tight with my Invisifil and my walking foot, and you won't be able to see it at all. You'll see it on the back, but you won't see it on the front. So love this stuff so much. It's made by Wonderfil, which is a great brand of thread. We got the discount code again. Amy asks, do I have a video on how I do binding? I do, but it won't make sense unless you take my binding class or my quilting basics class because I talk a lot more about binding, and my video just shows a couple close-up demos of the certain steps. So I encourage you to take the class. I also talk about how to put a sleeve on. I talk about how to put labels on. So it's really binding and a finishing class. I happen to know that the class this quarter is full, but we are working on putting in another one on the calendar because the class this one was I believe it was a Saturday. Somebody requested a Saturday, and then when she went to go sign up, it had filled already. So we're going to try to have another one. And then Barbara asked, does Invisifill go in the bobbin also? Yes, it can go in the bobbin. I'm going to be honest, mostly I use pre-wound bobbins in my sewing machine because I've gotten really lazy lately, and unless I need a specific color, like I'm top stitching and it's going to show on the back, I've been using pre-wound bobbins. They can get a lot more thread on the bobbin, and it's wound. The tension is perfect every time, and mostly it's because they put so much thread. I can quilt an entire quilt and sometimes just use a single bobbin. And I'm talking, I have a Juki long arm, so we're talking the larger bobbins, but still, I'm not taking the quilt off every 20 minutes and changing my thread. So anyway, yes, you can if you wanted to. Amy wants a virtual class for us out-of-towners. I will think about that, Amy. I have yet to teach online because I'm a very hands-on person. I walk around the class. I check, no, put your hand like this. No, the thread needs to come over here. I got to see what you're doing to be able to help you. It would be very frustrating for me if you're having trouble and I can't troubleshoot it because I'm not right there. So some people can do it, but I've yet to figure out how to do that unless I could transport myself to your sewing room. What size needle do you use on the thread? Judy asks. For Invisifill, I would probably still use a size 90 only because I'm going through so many layers, especially with this particular technique. I'm going through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 layers, maybe 6. So I don't want a thin needle that's gonna break. So an 80 or a 90. If I were stitching in the ditch, you could probably get away with a 70 or 80. But some people say you should match your needle to your thread, which is true, but you also have to think about how many layers you're going through, and I don't want to break needles if I don't have to. You guys, twice in the last month I have put a needle through my finger, but fortunately neither time, grateful for this, neither time they went through the nail. So just on the side of my finger, so I don't know how that happened, but I haven't put a needle through my finger since I was a teenager, so I'm not sure what that means about me. Don't tell me what that means about me. Faye says your in-person classes are fantastic. Can't wait for your visit in Bradenton in November. Me neither, Faye. Thank you for mentioning. Yep, I teach at guilds all over the state, so invite me and I will come teach whatever you'd like me to teach. Any other questions about flange binding or Invisifill or the Shenandoah quilt? Hit me up. Jeff Rich says Invisifill is great for bobbins. It's so fine you can get a lot of thread on a bobbin spool. That is true. But the bobbin thread that I use, I think it's a size 80. It's either Filtech or Deco Bond, and I think both of those are size 80. So you get a lot on a bobbin if you buy the pre-wounds too. Okay, I think that's everything for that. Please, again, don't worry, you can still ask questions, but I'm going to move on. This quilt has been hanging in the classroom. It kind of, just the backstory on this, I was standing at Kelsey's desk back in, I don't know, February or March of this year, and she had a cute little jelly roll sitting there, and I was just kind of fiddling with it as we were talking, and she said, "Oh, you want that?" I was like, sure. And so I took it home, and then I put a little note to myself to think about this for Christmas time, because it's hard to see through the plastic, but it's yellow. Well, it's these colors. It's these colors. So I just played around with some ideas, and again with Missouri Star, she has a pattern called Breezy Windmills. We're not carrying the pattern because you can get it, but to be completely honest, you don't need a pattern. I'm going to do a demo to show you how easy this quilt is. I took my little fabrics into the store, and I looked for a fabric that had a medium-sized print that had most of the colors that I wanted. And man, I think I just scored 100 on this one because it's got all the colors except for me, except for maybe the blue. I can't tell you how many people have looked at this and like, there's something about cardinals. One lady told a story about how the moment her father died, there was two cardinals sitting on the windowsill. So cardinals have always meant something to her. And they are pretty beautiful birds. They eat my blueberries, but besides that, they're beautiful birds. So this is all cardinal fabric. I looked for something else to put on the back and I couldn't find anything, so I put more on the back. And this actually is on my favorites page. We still have one more bolt of it. And these are also on my favorites page, these Moda jelly rolls. And by the way, there's only 20 strips on this, so they're $24.97 minus your 15% discount. But know that you're just working with 20 strips. There's usually 40, but that's all you need for this entire quilt. So I'm going to do a quick little demo here. You know what, I'm gonna talk about how to make the quilt, and then I'm gonna back up and we're gonna talk about this because I promised it earlier. So this is how easy this quilt is. This block here is made with 4 pieces, okay? A strip and a strip, a strip and a strip, strip and a strip, strip and a strip, all right? So all we're gonna do, and Gabriella, we are gonna do an overhead shot here now, is I'm gonna take these 2 strips and I'm gonna sew them together, and in a minute I'm gonna do a little demo on how to do that. And then we're gonna measure. Once I've pressed this, I'm gonna measure. It's 4.5, as it should be. We're gonna trim off the edge here. And now I'm going to cut some squares. I love this ruler because it has whole numbers and half numbers. It's an 8.5-inch square ruler. I use this probably 50% of all the time I cut at home. I'm using the 6x24 about half the time, and then this one the other half of the time. So there's my 4.5-inch strip. So now use my little pop socket here to hold it in place, and I'm just going to cut a bunch of these. Right? I'm going to cut 4 of them. So you can see how it goes together. And then one more. You see how it's nice to have something, it's like an extension of your hand. If you have something on your, whether it's a suction cup that I've talked about before or a pop socket, if you've got something, then this ruler is just an extension of your hand. You don't have to get your fingernails up there and keep moving it. So now we're going to create those windmills. Here we go. How easy was that, you guys? That's it. That is it. And if we go back to the quilt, you'll notice we've got that block and these 4 blocks, but look what happens. In the negative space, we've got a whole nother windmill there. So positives and negatives, and I don't know what it is about this, but it just really, really sings to me. Such a simple thing. This could be done in scrappy colors, you know, you could just go into your 2.5-inch strip stash and they could all be different. Your backgrounds could just be a solid color. So usually a lot of people would put a solid here and then would have, you know, lots of busy prints there. So you get to decide how you want to treat this, whether you want your windmills to be solid or printed, whatever. So lots going on there, and I will just tell you, I'm very proud of my borders because the birds are all, oh, you know what? This quilt is hung upside down. I was noticing earlier my sleeve is here, so I was about to say my birds are all going in the right direction, but actually they're hanging upside down, so I didn't even think about that till just now. So now, Gabriella, we are going to do a little sewing machine demo because I want to show you guys my demo on how to sew 2 strips together. I'm sorry if you're sick to death of this, but every time I do it, somebody says, I've never seen that before. That is awesome. And so I want you to see it. Put that there. Okay, I'm going to come around to the other side. Oh, well, let me just talk for a minute here. Sorry. Let me just talk for a minute. You know how, when you sew 2 strips together, you know they were the same length, but then you get to the end, and oh my goodness, why are they a 1/2-inch difference? And not only that, but you hold it up, and you've got a little bit of a C going, and it's not hanging straight. So then you go online and you ask, or you find that somebody says, oh, well, the first one you sew this way, and the next one you sew this way, and then if you go up and down like that, they'll all even out. That's not the answer. Nor is the answer pins. What's happening is, as you sew on the machine, your feed dogs are doing a really good job of pushing the fabric back, and your top foot is just going along for the ride. So slowly, slowly, they're feeding at different rates. Now, not every machine does that, but a lot of machines do. And so I have learned this technique from Margaret Islander, who used to come to conferences, and she would teach sewing tips that she would pull from the factories, when in fact we really did have clothing factories in America at one point, and she would go through and get some ideas and bring them to the sewing and quilting world. And this is probably the best thing I've ever learned. So I'm going to walk around and we're going to lift the machine up. We'll do a little you're going to do it. Thank you. All right. So bear with me here if you've seen this before. Very good. All right, so I've got two fabrics here, and I'm going to match them up. And it's wonderful that when we can use our foot as a third, or a needle as our third hand. So you notice I don't have any pins. I'm going to match these up together, and I'm going to take my hand, and you can use left or right, it doesn't matter. And I'm going to turn the fabric so it looks like a Z. Now, I'm going to hold the fabric as it's sewing. I'm going to hold the fabric. And you notice I'm holding the fabric taut. I'm not letting it just do whatever it wants, but I'm not holding it so tight that it can't sew. I'm just holding it taut. And I don't think I have a 1/4 of an inch here, but it doesn't matter. Now I'm about to eat to my hand, so I got to stop. And I'm going to rearrange my fabric. So lift it up, lay it down. I'm eyeballing this edge here to make sure everything, you can use your fingers to scrape, 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 scrape. And then I'm going to hit the gas, and I'm going to sew some more. Again, holding the fabric taut, but not so taut that it can't do what it wants to do. And with a 40-inch piece of fabric, you usually have to do it 3 times. And that's my tip right there. I'm going to step back behind the table. So I use this technique anytime I'm going to sew more than 12 inches. So sashing, borders, two long strips together. It's a great technique, no pins, and it's going to come out straight every time. So give it a try. So that is how I created these long strips, and you notice it lays nice and straight. There's none of this going on. Okay. And then back to Shenandoah, that's how I sewed these long strips together to make sure that everything came out nice and straight. So hopefully that made sense. And yeah, so we talk about that tip a lot because I want to make sure everybody can do that, everybody understands. All right, moving on. Don't move. We're going to talk about washing fabric. And this is not just for quilters, but sewers, anytime washing fabric or fabric bleeding. I think the most often seen question or classes, or in my classes or in my lectures when I go out to guilds, people will ask me, do you pre-wash your fabric? And here's my answer. I do not pre-wash my fabric very much because A, it's a lot of work and I'm inherently lazy. But secondly, most fabric doesn't need to be pre-washed. And let's face it, I think fabric looks better. Let's do a zoom out. Fabric just looks better if it's not been washed. You know, it's pristine. And a lot of my quilts hang here in the store and I want them to look as good as possible. So I don't pre-wash. However, if I've got some reds, or some purples, or maybe even a dark blue, like, yeah, I have a feeling about that fabric. I think it might bleed. And I forgot to bring a little coffee cup, but I will take a little white coffee cup. I will test I will test it, okay? I will test that particular fabric. I will get a coffee cup that's white inside, fill it with some water, put it in the microwave for 2 minutes, screaming hot, get a little, I'll show you here, show you how big of a piece that I test. It's not very big. And I would probably test this purple. Well, maybe. So, you know, a piece, oh, here we go. Yeah, a piece that big. and I will drop it into the mug of boiling water, very, very hot water, and let it walk away 5 or 10 minutes. Come back, fish it out, and is that water still white? Is my mug still white inside? If it's not, yeah, it bled, and what is happening is that extra dye is coming out into the water. You certainly don't want that coming out on your finished quilt or your clothing or anything else. So yes, you're going to have to treat that fabric somehow. So in the past, we've used a product called Retain, and our wholesaler no longer carries it. So now we have a product called Reactive Dye Fixative. It does the same thing, but it's going to be a slightly different method for treating your fabric. So in the past with Retain, I would get a pot of boiling water. I can't get 140 degrees in my washer, so I would just heat it, use my thermometer, get 140 degrees, put a little bit in. If you still have Retain, just follow the instructions. But I either use a pot, but if you don't have any pots you want to cook in. If you're cooking in it, don't use that. Or use a sink. Just put the stopper in. Fill up your sink with hot water and treat the fabric. This one, I was looking at it this morning, and it has slightly different instructions. It looks like you can use your washing machine because you only have to get up to a total of 105 degrees. And so you're going to mush it around. So just follow the instructions. In your handout, by the way, the last 2 pages talk about synthropol and this Retain or the fixative, dye fixative, whichever you have. So the instructions are just for Retain on my handout because I didn't realize they had changed the instructions. So what's the difference between these two? This one is the Retain or the dye fixative is for the fabric before you put it into a quilt, and then this one is the synthropol is after you put it into a quilt. It's going to especially for dyed or painted fabric or as a wetting agent. People will say, I'll just use my vinegar or salt. Well, I'm here to tell you the chemicals have changed in fabric and vinegar and salt no longer work. So you're going to need to go to one of these. You could also wash the fabric so many times that the dye no longer comes out, but then maybe it's not such good looking fabric anymore. You want to make sure some of that dye still stays in the fabric. So those are some choices. And again, most fabrics are very stable and they're not going to bleed at all. But even high quality fabrics, every once in a while you get one that bleeds. So you have to think about it. So Bonnie asked, for a quilt that's planning to get used, do you worry about shrinkage after washing? If you are using high quality fabric from the Sewing Studio, it's not going to shrink unless it's flannel. By the way, flannel shrinks up to 1 inch per yard. So you always, always, always pre-wash your flannel before you use it. But quilting fabric, I don't worry about shrinkage. If it does shrink, it's going to shrink such a little bit, it's just going to have this slightly wrinkled look on it, and that's going to be fine. So good question. Thank you for asking. Okay, so those are the difference between the two. I've been wanting to talk about these for a long time, and then by the time I finally got around to it, they no longer sell Retain, but this one's just as good. All right, I've got a few more things to talk about. Hang on just a second. So I've talked about this before, but everyone loves this bag. And in fact, I'm doing this for a friend of mine, Joan, who's actually not a quilter. So I've got some hacks for her. But this is the 3-pocket tote. I'm telling you, this picture does not do this thing any justice at all. Here's the one I carry around. I carry this one around a lot, and then I have this whole wardrobe of little bags that I carry to quilt shows and the downtown. Maitland is starting back up with their downtown concert series, so I'm excited about that. But here's why I love this bag. 1 pocket, flip it over, another pocket, and then there's a 3rd pocket inside. So this is called the 3-pocket tote. I will actually keep my phone in the center one because it's easy to easy to grab out of it. The pocket that's closest to my body gets the money, and the one that's farther away gets my business cards or a pen or lipstick or whatever I need. So I love having 3 pockets. It's a great palette for beautiful fabrics. This one started out, I have to show you how it started out looking like. Started out, I sewed a bunch of squares together. Well, I made the squares, made them bigger and bigger, and when you fold it all together, it looks like this. So what's cool is I start with a square, and the way it's folded, you end up with a cute little 3-pocket tote. I can't wait to show you how that works. A couple more options. Just going to show you. I started working on these, but I never finished the handles. But these are actually sewn with selvages. And what did I do? Oh, I guess when I sewed through the selvages, I used a pretty thread in the back, and then bound it, and all these need is handles. Here's some pretty Cafe facet fabric, is the pink with a black around, and then finally this one is made out of 2 layers of cork, probably a little too heavy and thick. I don't know why I even brought it to talk about, but one of the hacks that I wanted to talk about, if you're not a quilter or you are not a big fan of binding or just not real comfortable putting on binding, my hack is that we have a lot of fabric. Gabriella, I'm going to take this off and you're going to have to put a new sticker on. We have a lot of fabric that what's it called? Finishes without binding. So this is literally real cork made into fabric. It's got a fabric backing. And my thought, I was thinking about this on the way here today, is if you just had a pretty wave blade and you turned it into a square, you could just use a single layer of cork for this bag. It wouldn't have to be lined and bound. And we also have vinyls. Back in our little home deck area, we have vinyls, faux leather, cork, all of those things. If you got yourself a wave blade for your rotary cutter, and I didn't put those on my, well, they might still be on my favorites page, but you can buy different zigzag and wave blades for your rotary cutter, and you would just cut your square. With that, you could skip the binding and the lining. So could I use fat quarters for the bag? Absolutely. Let me just do my little demo here. And holy mackerel. Oh, I know why. Okay. I usually have a flat piece. That's what it was. I have a flat piece, but it's still in my sewing room. But yes, you can use a fat quarter, but you're going to start with 2 squares. How big are the squares? However big you want the bag. You'll notice this bag is a lot bigger than this bag. And it's just because I started with 2 different size squares. So play around with it, decide on the size you want, practice with your phone, try to decide how big does it need to be to put my phone in, but I don't want it to be too big, across my whole body or whatever. So yeah, it could be any size. So we start with a square. And oh, by the way, the reason I came up with these colors is we're going to get a close-up here of this ribbon. I found this ribbon at the sewing studio. I went home to get some fabrics to go with it and couldn't find anything. So I pulled colors from the ribbon and made what this is. So that's how that ended up. I know they look weird together, but they match the ribbon, so there. So here's what you're going to do. And by the way, again, there is a pattern. So I'm going to go through it quickly because I want the person who wrote the pattern to get credit, and I want you to buy her pattern. But this is how easy it is. We're going to take a square, fold it in half on the diagonal, and we're going to sew a line here and a line here. Don't ask me what that measurement is because it's in the pattern. But you're going to sew 2 lines. Here it is. We've sewed 2 lines. Watch carefully. Stick my hand in, flip this over, stick my hand in again, flip this over, and done. I'm going to tack it on the bottom. I'm going to, I'm probably going to tack it here and tack it here. And then I'm going to, I still got Kleenex in there. I'm going to hand sew my handle to the inside of that side and the inside of that side. You want to measure to see where you want this thing. Do I want it down low? Do I want it up high? You get to decide how big that, and to be honest, I don't know what my number is, but I'm tall, so my number is going to be different than your number. So yeah, you do need some handle. You could actually make the strap out of some leftover binding fabric, so I'll kind of go together. Let's talk about finishing. Let me find one that's finished. Well, this one's finished. So close up here. So I found these little Velcro dots. You could just use a square of Velcro. And then it's hard to see, but I've got these little Fimo stars that I used to hide. Well, it's not really hiding it, but just, you know, to finish it off. So there's a purple star and the blue star. Those were just in my stash somewhere. On this purple one, again with the Velcro here, I didn't have any rounds, so I just put a little square there, and then again a little button just to make it pretty. So great idea. My friend Joan is going to be making them for Christmas gifts, so she got the pattern, and I'm just thinking now that if she doesn't want to learn how to bind and she doesn't want to learn how to quilt, then cork or vinyl or faux leather would be a great option. And look at these. I have not seen these. I went to go pull some samples. These are cork, guys. This is really interesting blue, and then we got roses here. So you guys have to come see our cork collection because it has been upgraded since the last time I took a glance at it. So any questions about, yes, definitely fat quarters, and then of course one fat quarter for the outside and one for the inside. If you're just using quilting fabric, you're going to need to quilt through it or sew through it, just make it a little bit bigger. The name of the pattern is the 3-pocket tote, and I believe it's the quilt company, Karen Montgomery. I think she lives in Florida now. Some of you guys may know her. So yeah, I just think it's a brilliant, brilliant pattern. I have lost track of the number of times that I've showed you guys this, but every time I show it, it explodes and we sell out of this pattern. So I make sure that we always have a few in stock because it's an awesome pattern. All right, any other questions about what I've talked so far? Hi, Pauline. Hope you're feeling better. She was on lockdown. Hope she's not on lockdown anymore. Let's see. 2 more things. Hold still. Don't go anywhere. 2 more things to talk about. All right. Ta-da! We've got another quilt. A backstory on this quilt. I've got to get a sip of water. Pardon me. Backstory on this quilt, it was actually a block of the weekend at a quilting retreat up in Lake Yale years and years ago. They taught us how to make a block, and we were told to bring black and white fabrics, you know, black on white and white on black, and then one bright color. So everybody made a few blocks. We put them up on the wall, and then we pulled a name, and I was, oh, please, 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 I want this quilt, and I got this quilt. It's the only one I've won. I've been going for probably 15 years, and this is the only one I got, and I was very happy. So lots of different black and whites that were used, lots of different bright colors that were used. Of course, it doesn't have to be in blacks and whites. Pardon me a second. I'm going to go get the pattern for this, if I can find it. I've gotten messy here. There it is. This is called Paradigm Shift. Again, it's in my favorites. And here it is in black and white and diamonds. I'm sorry, lime fabric, which I happen to adore lime fabric, as you probably know. So again, it doesn't have to be in black and white. If you Google or Pinterest Paradigm Shift, you will see a million different versions of this. It's just been a very popular pattern through the years. It's not a brand new pattern. It's been around for a while. It took me a while to source it to be able to talk about it today, but I did. But this is the original quilt. And I have a little demo for you, so we're going to clear our space here and do my little demo. I'm making a mess. It's going to take me a while to clean up here. Okay. All right, so my demo, here is the block. That's where we're headed, okay? And there happens to be another one because when you make one block, you actually make 2. So here we go. I'm going to make a block that looks like this and a block that looks like this. Some of you might go, oh, I know where she's going next. Let me open that up. Okay, so as you can tell, I've got a square here and then 2 more black squares the same size. You sew them in a row, sew 2 fabrics on the other side. The same thing for this one. Turn it around, bring it down. So whatever size this is, you're going to sew 2 more. So 2 on either side, you end up with a square. I'm sure you know where I'm going with this. You're going to line these up as best you can. Sometimes I'll even put a pin through that, or you just cut one at a time. You know, sometimes you got a false economy when you try to stack things up, and it takes so much time stacking things up, it's easier just to sew through. I don't have a long enough ruler with me, but you can imagine. Yeah, it's not quite long enough, but anyway, you're going to cut that in half. Of course, you're going to make sure you cut through the point, the point, the point, and the point. Cut through, and then let's pretend we did, and then you're going to sew it to its partner. You want to, whatever purple, you know, purple. You don't want a half purple and half yellow or something. It's got to be purple on purple. So there's our block right there. So it's deceptively simple. I'm going to show you the pattern one more time. It's called Paradigm Shift. Super easy. I love the way she's laid out this pattern with the off center. And did I do that on this? I can't, oh yes, I guess I did. It's in a different place. Oh, it's easier to see on the screen. Yeah, so it's off center. It's kind of a log cabin-y kind of idea where whatever you would do with log cabins, you can do with half square triangles and vice versa. So again, it could be bright colors with black centers. It could be Christmas with white centers. Sky's the limit, but it's a really cool pattern. So give that one a try. That one's Paradigm Shift. It's on my favorites page. And I have one more thing to show you guys, and it's not hanging, so I will pull it out. It's a big honkin' quilt. There goes everything. All right, you ready for this? I think I'm going to put it over the table. It's one of the first scrap buster quilts I made, and I went overboard. I just couldn't stop making these blocks. They were so much fun. But I'll do a demo. The handout is on the back of the printout, or maybe it's the second one in the printout. Oh, I'm having such a hard time because this is so big. All right. Now we're gonna. Can we get all the way out, Gabriella? You get the idea. Okay, you get the idea. So one thing I want to say is, if you were to zoom in on this yellow fabric, the main yellow fabric, I'm here to tell you that is it was one ugly piece of batik. It was yellow with purple in the yellow background, purple in the foreground. Like, ooh, I have 2 yards of it. What am I going to do with this? I challenged myself. And oh my gosh, it just shines so beautifully in this quilt. Maybe you're not far enough back, but I think it does. And if you're a follower of Bonnie Hunter, we're going to close up here again. If you're a follower of Bonnie Hunter, she has this thing where she says, if it's still ugly, you didn't cut it small enough. And so that got embroidered on the back of my quilt because, man, that yellow fabric was ugly. But it really, really works with this fabric. This is a really super scrappy quilt, and I'm going to show you how I made it. And you're going to be amazed at how simple it is. And then that'll be it. So if you had any questions about anything I talked about today, throw them up there for me in the comments section. And let me just go grab my demo. Okay, you ready for this? All right. So yeah, let's stay on the table here. So this is where we're headed, by the way. That's a block. And this, I just happen to know, this quilt, I believe it's 6 blocks by 8 blocks. So I'm just going to pull a little bit up here so you can see, and I'm not lying, that's a block right there. Let's see, I'm trying to get this. Yeah, so you see that. That's a block. When I take it away, there's the block, okay? So I'm going to make a whole bunch of these. Now, we are not going to sew one piece to one piece to one piece. No, we're not going to do that. We're going to do something called strip quilting. Love this technique so much. You remember when we were talking about sewing long strips together? Well, here you go. This is what I did. I sewed the green to the white to the yellow, gold, sorry. And then I sewed 3 more. And then here it is. I have to reorient myself with my hand out here. So here it is. 6 strips of fabric all sewn together. You see how beautifully they lay? There's no curves, there's no nothing, because I sewed them in the process that I showed you earlier. Sandy Cross, by the way, there is a discount code for TTNT. If you type in, oh, you say it's not working. Okay, we'll work on that. Thanks for letting us know. We will definitely work on that while I'm chatting here. So again, 3, 3 is 6. And to be honest, what I do when I have to sew a lot of strips like this together is I don't sew them all and then press them. I'll sew 2 and press them, 2 and press them, and 2, or 3 and 3. And then every time I sew a seam, I'll press it, because otherwise it's too hard to get in here with 6 and try to press. So I do 2 at a time. Okay, so now I didn't press this, and you'll see why in a minute. This is one place where it's a little bit fussy. You want to be sure that when you're sewing down here, you didn't somehow, get it like this. I'm exaggerating, but you want it straight on. So you kind of have to play with the seam and just kind of make sure everybody's happy. And yeah, I would probably put a few pins in there just to make sure that everybody stays happy all the way down. So you end up with, next end up with a very big bracelet, okay? It's a tube. It's a tube. Now I'm going to take my tube, I'm going to lay it down, and I'm going to slice the other way. Let me see if I can get this looking like that. So I'm going to slice. So if these were 2.5 inch strips, which they were, then I'm going to take my cutter, put it on the 2.5 inch line, and I'm going to cut a whole bunch of little tubes, little bracelets. You with me so far? So this tube, I'm going to get a whole bunch of them. I can't remember how many I got out. I do know that I could make 2.5 blocks with one of these guys, okay? And I'll tell you what to do with the half ones in a minute. Okay, so I've got a bunch of bracelets out of this. Make sure you all cut them all 2.5. And now the magic begins. Now that I've done all that work, I'm going to tell you, don't use a very tight stitch, because you're going to take this apart 6 times to make 6 strips. And each time you take them apart, you're going to take out a different seam. Let me just lay this out, and then we'll talk some more. You see where this is going. You see my yellow, all right? Everything else I don't care about, but I care about the yellow. So the first time I'm going to take out this green and yellow. The next bracelet, I'm going to take out the white and green. The next bracelet, I'm going to take out. So each time I'm taking out a different one, and then when you lay them out, you get this magic. I think this is just the coolest thing. I've seen this quilt made up in a lot of different ways. The other one that I made is, instead of using one fabric all the time, I used dark pinks, and then all the rest of my fabrics were low volume, so it made a great baby quilt. I don't have that anymore because I sent it away for one of the babies in my family. But anytime you have a lot of 2.5 inch strips, this is a great way to go. You could, of course, purchase a 2.5 inch strip roll and then just add one more dark or light or something that really makes it pop. And also, you don't have to do that. This yellow was a design choice if you just wanted just pure scrappy with nothing jumping out. But Gabriella, let's do a zoom out again. I really, really feel like if you're going to do it super scrappy, then you really want to have one fabric that kind of leads the eye around and kind of pulls it all together. If it was just 2 inch strips or 2 inch squares over the whole thing, I think you would just get kind of lost. I think the yellow kind of pulls, isn't as ugly as that yellow is, I think it pulls it together really well. And I have one more thing I wanted to mention about this. I promised you, when you have this full-on piece, you're going to get, I want to say it's 2.5 blocks out of it. What are you going to do with those half blocks? Well, you don't have to throw them away. You'll notice, let's just compare this block with this block. This block, you know, the pinks and the blues, and it's all very organized, just the way I've got it on my table here. But this block is not organized at all. It's a bunch of different squares, and that's where I used all my leftover bits. So all my leftover bracelets, I had maybe 2 or 3 bracelets per tube, and so I just kind of put them all together and made these blocks. So if you look really carefully at this, you'll see some blocks are very organized and some are super scrappy. So that's what I wanted to say about that. I can see them from here. So if there aren't any questions, and we fixed the discount code, so discount code away. Golly, I think that's everything that I was going to tell you guys. Let me just look at my cheat sheet real quick here while you're thinking of questions for me. Nope, that is it. Wow, that hour and 17 minutes just flew by. I thought it was going to take a lot longer. I talked really fast, hopefully not too fast, but you know what? You can always go back and watch it again, or just even break down the little sections. So thank you so much, guys, for following along and for hopefully learning something new and getting inspired maybe a little bit. And loved having you. And that's all I got. So I'm going to say goodbye, and we'll see you next month. Take care.